Tonight, you are not here by accident, and this moment is not random. There are nights when rest is not enough, when sleep comes, but something underneath remains awake, watching, waiting, pressing without sound. Not every weight announces itself, not every influence arrives with fear, and not every pressure is loud enough to be named. Some things operate quietly, learning your patterns, your silences, your tired hours, slipping into moments when vigilance fades, not because of weakness, but because of exhaustion. Over time, what should never have been familiar begins to feel normal, and what was never meant to stay begins to feel permanent. This is how unseen interference survives, not through force, but through proximity, not through attack, but through access. But access is never eternal, and familiarity is never invincible. There is a place where nothing hidden can organize itself, a dwelling where nothing unseen can coordinate influence, a covering where pressure does not argue because it cannot enter. Psalm 91 speaks of that dwelling, not as a reaction to danger, but as a decision to remain. Psalm 35 reveals that what operates in shadow collapses when truth is allowed to stand without interruption. Psalm 17 seals awareness, not with fear, but with watchful calm. Together, they do not summon confrontation, they establish territory. Tonight is not about identifying what followed you, naming what attempted to influence you, or revisiting the origin of the weight you felt. Attention feeds what should starve. Reaction sustains what should dissolve. What ends tonight does not end because it is confronted, but because it is no longer permitted to remain. As you stay here, something begins to shift beneath awareness. The pressure that once felt close begins to feel distant. The heaviness that once felt personal begins to feel external. The influence that once felt active begins to feel irrelevant. Nothing dramatic happens, nothing explodes, nothing demands your effort. This is how authority works in the unseen, not through noise but through permanence. You're not pushing anything away, you are occupying a place it cannot follow. You're not breaking something by force, you are letting it lose its hold. And this state does not need to be rushed, because what dissolves through presence does not return through absence. As this state settles, it becomes clear that what has been influencing you was never sustained by strength, but by continuity. It remained because it was allowed to repeat, because it was never interrupted by stillness, because it learned how to coexist with distraction and fatigue. Hidden pressure does not need belief to survive, it only needs space, and space disappears when presence becomes stable. This is why nothing here requires effort from you, because effort would imply struggle, and struggle would imply that something still has authority to contest your position. It does not. What has been operating unseen does not lose power because it is named. It loses power because it no longer finds alignment. Alignment breaks when your inner posture no longer responds, when your awareness no longer adjusts itself around pressure, when your rest no longer negotiates with disturbance. Psalm 91 establishes a dwelling that is not reactive, a place that does not shift when conditions change, a refuge that remains intact regardless of what moves outside it. Psalm 35 allows false structures to collapse without confrontation because truth does not need to argue in order to stand. Psalm 17 seals the inner watch, not by heightening alertness, but by removing vulnerability. Together they do not create a moment, they create an environment, and environments reshape everything that enters them without asking permission. As you remain here, there is a gradual loosening that does not announce itself, a quiet unraveling of what once felt tight, persistent, or unavoidable. Thoughts that once returned compulsively begin to lose their urgency. Fears that once guided decisions begin to lose coherence, and patterns that once felt inherited begin to lose familiarity. This is not because you are resisting them, but because they no longer recognize the space they depended on. What depended on reaction starves when reaction is absent. What depended on repetition weakens when rhythm is broken. What depended on access dissolves when boundaries become implicit rather than enforced. You may notice that the body itself begins to respond, not by collapsing into sleep or tension, but by settling into neutrality, by releasing the need to prepare, by letting go of the subtle readiness that once accompanied rest. This is not vulnerability, this is safety. Safety that does not need to be monitored, safety that does not need to be defended, safety that does not require reinforcement. As time passes within this state, there is no sense of escalation, no peak to reach, no climax to expect. The effect is cumulative, structural, and irreversible, because what ends through irrelevance does not return through force. You are not required to hold on to anything, remember anything, or repeat anything. The Psalms operate beneath attention, aligning what cannot be consciously managed, settling what could not be reasoned away, sealing what could not be protected through effort. And as this alignment deepens, the distinction between inside and outside begins to soften, not because boundaries weaken, but because nothing presses against them anymore. What once followed you quietly can no longer follow at all, because the path it used no longer exists. And this is how cancellation truly happens, not as an event, but as a condition, not as a declaration, but as a permanence that does not need to announce itself to remain effective. As this condition continues to establish itself, the understanding deepens that nothing meaningful is happening at the surface, because the real shift has already taken place underneath. What once relied on proximity now finds distance. What once relied on familiarity now encounters estrangement, and what once relied on repetition now finds silence where rhythm used to exist. Hidden pressure survives only as long as it can synchronize itself with your inner movement, as long as it can anticipate reaction, as long as it can rely on you adjusting yourself around it. But when adjustment stops, synchronization breaks, and when synchronization breaks, influence loses coordination. This is why stillness is not passive, and rest is not neutral to what operates unseen. Rest interrupts patterns without confrontation, presence dissolves alignment without resistance, and permanence outlasts anything that depends on interruption to survive. Psalm 91 speaks of a dwelling that does not fluctuate with circumstance, a refuge that remains whether the world outside is calm or chaotic, because it was never designed to respond, only to remain. Psalm 35 reveals that opposition collapses when truth is no longer pressured to justify itself, because what is false cannot sustain weight indefinitely. Psalm 17 seals awareness by removing the sense of exposure, not by increasing vigilance, but by eliminating access. Together, they create a condition where what once felt internal is recognized as foreign, where what once felt personal is understood as external, and where what once felt permanent is revealed as temporary by the simple act of remaining. As this unfolds, there may be a growing sense that something has stopped trying, not because it was defeated in a dramatic way, but because it no longer finds incentive to persist. Incentive disappears when outcomes are no longer predictable, when reaction is no longer reliable, when presence no longer fluctuates. This is how unseen interference withdraws, not in panic, not in resistance, but in quiet disengagement. You may notice that moments which once carried emotional residue now end cleanly, that interactions which once lingered internally now pass without imprint, and that memories which once carried charge now surface without weight. This is not forgetting, it is reclassification. What no longer holds authority no longer organizes experience. The nervous system responds by releasing its habitual readiness, not collapsing into passivity, but settling into a state where preparation is unnecessary. Breath deepens without instruction, muscles soften without loss of strength, awareness widens without vulnerability. This is not the absence of alertness, it is the absence of threat. And where threat is absent, vigilance becomes optional rather than compulsory. As time continues in this state, there is no sense of monitoring progress, because progress implies movement toward an outcome, and there is no outcome to reach. What has been established is not moving toward completion, it is simply continuing as it is. This continuity is what makes it irreversible, because nothing is being held together by effort, memory, or repetition. What exists without effort does not collapse when effort stops. The Psalms here do not function as words to be remembered, repeated, or activated. They function as structure, aligning what cannot be consciously managed and settling what could never be controlled. And as this structure holds, the idea of something returning loses credibility because return requires a pathway, and the pathway that once existed has dissolved. What followed you quietly no longer recognizes where you are, not because you moved aggressively, but because you remained steadily. This is how permanence is established in the unseen, not through escalation, but through quiet consistency that cannot be negotiated with or undone. And as this condition continues, there is nothing left to anticipate, nothing left to correct, nothing left to defend against, because what no longer has access no longer has influence, and what no longer has influence no longer has reason to remain. As this permanence continues to assert itself quietly, it becomes evident that what once felt persistent was never as rooted as it appeared. Persistence depended on your participation, on subtle agreements made through exhaustion, distraction, or repetition, not through conscious consent, but through gradual accommodation. When accommodation ends, persistence loses ground. This is why nothing here asks you to resist or oppose anything, because opposition still grants relevance. What loses relevance loses structure, and what loses structure cannot maintain influence. Psalm 91 does not create a boundary you must defend. It establishes a position that defends itself. Psalm 35 does not seek vindication through reaction. It allows reality to expose what cannot sustain truth. Psalm 17 does not heighten sensitivity. It removes the condition of exposure altogether. Together, they form a continuity that does not fluctuate with attention, emotion, or circumstance. As this continuity settles, the mind stops orienting itself around what might happen next, because anticipation was a survival habit, and survival is no longer being negotiated here. Thoughts arise and pass without assembling into sequences, without forming the loops that once fed pressure. Emotional responses appear and dissolve without anchoring themselves in identity. Sensations move through the body without triggering readiness or defense. This is not numbness, it is clarity without threat. Clarity that does not demand action. Clarity that does not escalate. Clarity that allows experience to pass without residue. Over time, even the memory of being followed begins to feel distant, not because it is denied, but because it no longer connects to the present position. Connection required alignment, and alignment has been removed. This is why attempts to reintroduce pressure feel incomplete, unconvincing, unable to gather momentum. Momentum depends on friction, and friction has disappeared. The system no longer provides resistance for pressure to push against, nor engagement for it to feed on. As this continues, the body recognizes safety not as a signal, but as an environment, responding by releasing the last traces of guardedness that once accompanied rest. Sleep becomes deeper without vigilance, wakefulness becomes steadier without effort, and attention moves freely without being pulled toward threat. This freedom does not feel expansive or dramatic. It feels normal, as if something unnatural has simply been removed. What was unnatural was the pressure, not the peace. Peace here is not introduced, it is restored. And restoration does not announce itself, it stabilizes. As the Psalms continue to operate beneath conscious effort, they do not amplify experience, they normalize it, returning the system to a baseline where nothing unseen organizes behavior. In this baseline, decisions arise without fear, rest occurs without guilt, and silence is no longer interpreted as vulnerability. Silence becomes neutral, even supportive, because nothing uses it as an opening anymore. And as this neutrality holds, the idea of needing protection fades into irrelevance, not because protection is gone, but because it is no longer something you think about. It has become the condition within which thinking occurs. When protection becomes implicit, anxiety loses language, fear loses narrative, and pressure loses timing. Nothing rushes, nothing follows, nothing waits for opportunity. Opportunity has been removed. What remains is a steady, unremarkable sense of being exactly where you are without needing to justify it, explain it, or maintain it. And this steadiness does not close itself off when attention wanders or when time passes, because it does not depend on awareness to exist. It existed before awareness noticed it, and it remains after awareness moves elsewhere. This is why what has ended cannot return, not because it was forcefully expelled, but because the environment it required no longer exists. And as this condition continues, it does so quietly, without announcement, without conclusion, without any need to be marked as complete. As this quiet stability continues, the realization settles that what once felt like protection being applied is now simply protection being assumed. There is no longer a sense of something working on your behalf in the background, because the background itself has changed. What once needed intervention no longer presents itself as a problem to solve. The environment has shifted to a place where interference cannot gather coherence, where influence cannot align itself long enough to produce effect. This is not the result of effort or vigilance, but of position. Position removes the need for response. Psalm 91 establishes that position not as a temporary shelter, but as a dwelling, a place that does not require re-entry or renewal. Psalm 35 allows anything that depends on distortion to collapse under its own weight, without pressure, without accusation, without pursuit. Psalm 17 seals awareness by removing the sense that something could approach unnoticed, not by heightening alertness, but by eliminating proximity. Together, they do not generate intensity, they generate certainty. Certainty here is not belief, it is absence of contradiction. Nothing argues against this state because nothing can reach it with enough closeness to challenge it. As this continues, the mind stops rehearsing outcomes because rehearsal depended on uncertainty, and uncertainty has lost relevance. The future no longer pulls attention forward defensively, and the past no longer pulls awareness backward reactively. Time loses its leverage when neither direction carries threat. Experience unfolds without requiring interpretation, and interpretation fades when nothing needs to be assessed for safety. The body responds by remaining available rather than braced, grounded rather than guarded, present rather than prepared. This availability is not openness to influence, it is openness without exposure. Exposure depended on access, and access has been removed. As minutes pass, even the subtle impulse to check whether the state remains intact dissolves, because checking implies the possibility of loss. Loss is no longer a category here. What exists does not fluctuate with attention, emotion, or circumstance. It remains because it is not maintained by effort. The Psalms continue to operate not as words to follow, but as structure holding the environment steady beneath conscious awareness. They do not amplify sensation, they normalize it, returning perception to a state where pressure is no longer assumed and threat is no longer expected. In this normalization, rest becomes deeper without collapse, focus becomes clearer without strain, and silence becomes supportive rather than uncertain. Silence no longer invites intrusion because nothing knows how to use it as an opening. What once relied on gaps and fatigue to persist finds no rhythm to attach to. Rhythm has changed. The system no longer syncs with pressure, no longer times itself around disturbance, no longer anticipates interruption. Anticipation was the last thread connecting influence to experience, and that thread has dissolved. As this steadiness continues, there is no sense of something having been taken away, only the quiet recognition that something unnatural is no longer present. What remains feels ordinary, not elevated, not intense, simply right. Rightness here does not require explanation. It stands on its own, and because it stands without defense, nothing presses against it, nothing tests it, nothing waits for a moment to return. The space holds itself. It does not announce permanence, it demonstrates it by continuing unchanged. And as this continuation unfolds, there is nothing more to initiate, nothing more to resolve, nothing more to guard against. What needed to end has ended not through confrontation, but through the steady presence that made continuation impossible. As this state remains uninterrupted, it becomes increasingly clear that what once appeared as an external struggle was sustained internally by expectation rather than force. Expectation created readiness, readiness created tension, and tension created a place for influence to rest. When expectation dissolves, readiness releases, and tension no longer organizes the inner world. This release does not feel dramatic or emotional. It feels structural, as though something fundamental has quietly reset to its original alignment. Psalm 91 does not promise protection that must be renewed each time fear arises. It reveals a dwelling where fear no longer determines posture. Psalm 35 does not demand vindication through reaction. It allows anything that relied on distortion to lose coherence when truth stands without interruption. Psalm 17 does not sharpen perception to detect threat. It removes the condition that allowed threat to feel near in the first place. Together, they establish a condition where vigilance becomes unnecessary, not because danger has been confronted, but because proximity has been removed. As this continues, the mind no longer organizes itself around potential outcomes because outcome-based thinking belonged to environments where loss was possible. Here, loss has no framework. Thoughts still arise, but they do not assemble into plans or defenses. They pass through awareness without instruction, without urgency, without consequence. Emotional responses surface and dissolve without claiming identity, without demanding action, without anchoring themselves in memory. This is not suppression, it is proportion. Proportion returns experience to its appropriate scale, where nothing unseen is allowed to appear larger than it is. The body responds by remaining neutral rather than guarded, balanced rather than braced, available rather than alert. Breath deepens naturally, muscles soften without weakness, and attention widens without exposure. This widening does not invite intrusion because intrusion no longer has a path. As time continues within this environment, even subtle disturbances lose their timing. What once arrived at predictable moments finds no rhythm to align with. Rhythm depended on familiarity, and familiarity has dissolved. The system no longer signals availability through fatigue or distraction, because fatigue is no longer interpreted as vulnerability. Vulnerability has been redefined. It is no longer associated with rest, silence, or stillness. Rest has become inhospitable to interference. Silence no longer functions as an opening, because nothing knows how to use it. Stillness no longer invites pressure, because pressure cannot synchronize itself without movement. As the Psalms continue to operate beneath conscious awareness, they do not intensify the experience, they stabilize it, removing the need for escalation or emphasis. The experience does not move toward a climax or resolution, because resolution implies conflict, and conflict has already lost relevance. What has changed is not the presence of life, but the absence of interference. This absence does not feel like emptiness. It feels like relief without excitement, clarity without effort, steadiness without rigidity. It feels normal, as though something unnatural has finally been removed. And because it feels normal, it endures. Nothing is being held together by will, belief, or repetition. What exists is not maintained, it is assumed. Assumption here does not mean neglect, it means inevitability. The system has settled into a condition where nothing unseen organizes behavior, nothing hidden shapes decision, nothing subtle pressures timing. As this condition continues, it does so quietly, without needing acknowledgement, without seeking confirmation, without announcing permanence. It simply remains unchanged as moments pass, demonstrating by continuity what no declaration could ever prove. As this steadiness continues without interruption, the awareness grows that what once felt like something working against you was sustained mainly by your system being trained to expect disturbance. Expectation shaped perception, perception shaped posture, and posture created space for pressure to remain active. When expectation dissolves, posture resets, and the space pressure relied on quietly disappears. This shift does not feel like victory, it feels like neutrality returning. Psalm 91 does not invite you to stay alert for danger, it places you where danger no longer organizes attention. Psalm 35 does not demand confrontation with what resists. It allows resistance to lose coherence when it can no longer provoke reaction. Psalm 17 does not increase sensitivity. It removes the assumption of exposure, sealing awareness without heightening fear. Together they create a continuity where the inner world no longer mirrors external tension, where life moves without compressing inward, and where responsibility no longer carries threat. As this condition stabilizes, the mind stops checking for signs of return because checking implies that return is possible. Return requires access, and access no longer exists. Thoughts that once arrived with urgency now arrive without instruction, emotions that once carried weight now surface without authority, and sensations that once triggered readiness now pass without consequence. This is not indifference, it is proportion restored. Proportion allows experience to remain what it is without being exaggerated by fear or anticipation. The body responds by maintaining balance rather than defense, by staying present rather than prepared, by remaining available rather than vigilant. Breath moves freely without direction, muscles remain engaged without tension, and attention flows without being pulled toward threat. As time passes, even the concept of interruption loses meaning. Interruption assumes a break in safety, a gap where something could enter. Here, there are no gaps. Silence does not open space for pressure, fatigue does not invite intrusion, and stillness does not signal vulnerability. What once depended on those openings can no longer find rhythm or timing. The Psalms continue to operate not as repeated phrases, but as structure, aligning perception beneath conscious thought and maintaining an environment where nothing unseen organizes behavior. They do not escalate intensity, they normalize stability, returning the system to a baseline where peace is not achieved but assumed. In this baseline, decisions arise without fear, rest occurs without guilt, and time passes without pressure. Nothing waits for opportunity, nothing gathers momentum, nothing coordinates itself in the background. Coordination depended on response, and response has ended. As this environment holds, the sense of being watched or followed dissolves completely, not because it is denied, but because it no longer connects to present experience. Connection required alignment, and alignment has been broken by steady presence. What remains is a quiet certainty that nothing is arranging itself against you, nothing is learning your rhythms, nothing is anticipating your movements. This certainty does not feel triumphant, it feels ordinary, as though the system has returned to how it was always meant to function. And because it feels ordinary, it endures without effort. Nothing needs to be reinforced, nothing needs to be maintained, nothing needs to be remembered. The state holds itself, unchanged by attention, emotion, or time, continuing quietly as moments pass, proving through consistency that what has ended will not return. As this condition remains stable, it becomes evident that what once felt like vigilance was actually a learned response to uncertainty, and uncertainty no longer governs the inner environment. When uncertainty dissolves, vigilance has nothing to attach to, and without attachment, it fades naturally. Psalm 91 does not train awareness to watch for danger, it relocates awareness to a place where danger cannot establish relevance. Psalm 35 does not engage opposition directly, it allows opposition to lose momentum when it cannot provoke reaction. Psalm 17 does not heighten sensitivity to detect threat, it removes the assumption that threat is near enough to matter. Together they establish a reality where pressure does not need to be resisted because it cannot organize itself long enough to influence behavior. As this continues, the mind no longer scans the future for signs of disruption because scanning was a survival habit, and survival is no longer being negotiated. Thought becomes quieter without being empty, simpler without being reduced, moving freely without being recruited into defense. Emotions arise without anchoring identity, pass without leaving residue, and dissolve without demanding resolution. Sensations move through the body without triggering readiness or alarm, because the body no longer interprets change as vulnerability. This is not disengagement, it is recalibration. Recalibration returns the system to a state where presence is neutral and movement does not imply threat. As time passes in this environment, even subtle impulses to control outcomes dissolve, because control was a response to unpredictability, and unpredictability has lost leverage. Life unfolds without compressing inward. Responsibilities arise without becoming burdens, and interaction occurs without lingering internally. The Psalms continue to operate beneath conscious awareness, not amplifying experience, but stabilizing it, ensuring that nothing unseen regains influence through repetition or fatigue. Stability here does not feel rigid, it feels flexible without exposure, steady without stiffness, grounded without heaviness. Silence no longer feels like a pause between dangers, it feels complete in itself. Stillness does not invite intrusion because nothing recognizes it as an opening. Fatigue does not signal weakness because weakness is no longer associated with rest. As this steadiness persists, the idea of something returning quietly becomes implausible, not because it is feared, but because the conditions it required no longer exist. Conditions do not regenerate without cooperation, and cooperation has ended. What once relied on subtle permission through distraction or exhaustion finds no alignment here, and because there is no alignment, there is no continuation. What remains is an ordinary sense of being present without needing to manage presence, of being safe without thinking about safety, of being steady without effort. This ordinariness is not dull, it is reliable. Reliability is what endures through time, through change, through silence. And as moments continue to pass within this reliability, nothing presses inward, nothing organizes itself in the background, nothing waits for opportunity. The environment holds, unchanged, demonstrating through quiet continuity that what has ended through irrelevance does not return through force, repetition, or time. As this quiet certainty continues, the realization settles that what once felt like effort was actually the system compensating for instability that is no longer present. Effort fades naturally when nothing presses for response, when nothing requires defense, when nothing demands readiness. Psalm 91 does not ask you to sustain peace. It reveals that peace remains when the conditions for disturbance are removed. Psalm 35 does not pursue what resists. It allows resistance to dissolve when it can no longer provoke engagement. Psalm 17 does not sharpen awareness to guard against intrusion. It removes the premise that intrusion could occur at all. Together, they establish an environment where the inner world no longer mirrors threat, where experience unfolds without compression, and where time passes without urgency. As this environment holds, the mind releases its final habits of comparison and measurement because comparison implied risk and measurement implied loss. Here, nothing is gained and nothing is lost. There is only continuity. Thoughts appear and pass without organizing the future or reinterpreting the past. Emotions arise and dissolve without claiming meaning, and sensations move through the body without triggering readiness. This is not detachment, it is proportion restored. Proportion allows life to be experienced as it is without being amplified by fear or anticipation. The body responds by remaining balanced rather than braced, grounded rather than guarded, present rather than prepared. Breath moves freely without instruction, muscles remain engaged without tension, and attention flows without being pulled toward disturbance. As moments continue, even the sense of time being something to manage dissolves, because management belonged to environments where delay could be dangerous. Delay has no consequence here. Silence no longer feels like a gap, fatigue no longer signals exposure, and stillness no longer suggests vulnerability. What once depended on those signals can no longer find timing or rhythm. The Psalms continue to operate beneath conscious awareness, not as repeated phrases, but as structure, maintaining an inner environment where nothing unseen organizes behavior. They do not intensify experience, they normalize stability, returning perception to a baseline where peace is assumed rather than achieved. In this baseline, responsibility does not carry threat, rest does not require justification, and presence does not need to be maintained. Nothing presses inward, nothing coordinates itself in the background, nothing waits for opportunity. Opportunity has been removed because access has ended. As this condition persists, the sense of being followed dissolves completely, not because it is denied, but because it no longer connects to present reality. Connection required alignment, and alignment has been broken by steady presence. What remains is a quiet reliability that does not announce itself, does not seek confirmation, and does not depend on awareness to continue. It remains unchanged as time passes, demonstrating through continuity what no declaration could ever establish, that what has ended through irrelevance does not return through effort, repetition, or attention. As this state continues without interruption, the understanding deepens that what once appeared as pressure was never sustained by strength, intention, or power, but by familiarity and timing. It learned when to appear, when to withdraw, when to wait, and when to return, not because it was intelligent, but because it relied on patterns that were never questioned. Patterns form where repetition is uninterrupted, and interruption does not require force, it requires presence. Presence breaks rhythm. When rhythm breaks, coordination fails, and when coordination fails, influence cannot sustain itself. This is why nothing here asks you to confront, expose, or accuse anything, because confrontation still grants relevance, and relevance is what allowed unseen interference to persist. What is no longer relevant cannot organize itself. Psalm 91 establishes a dwelling that does not react to pressure, a position that does not shift when conditions change, a refuge that remains intact whether awareness is sharp or drifting. Psalm 35 allows what operates through distortion to collapse when truth no longer competes for space, because false structures require constant reinforcement to survive. Psalm 17 seals awareness not by increasing alertness, but by removing the assumption that something could approach unnoticed. Together, they do not create intensity, urgency, or spectacle. They create continuity, and continuity is what ends what depends on disruption. As this continuity settles, the inner world no longer arranges itself around the possibility of disturbance. Anticipation dissolves, readiness releases, and the subtle tension that once accompanied rest disappears without effort. This does not feel like relief in the emotional sense. It feels like normalization, as though something unnatural has finally been removed and the system has returned to its original alignment. Thoughts arise without assembling into loops, emotions surface without anchoring identity, sensations move through the body without triggering defense. This is not suppression, it is proportion restored. Proportion allows experience to remain what it is without being exaggerated by fear or expectation. The body responds by maintaining balance rather than vigilance, by remaining present rather than prepared, by staying available without being exposed. Breath deepens naturally, muscles soften without weakness, and attention widens without vulnerability. As time continues in this environment, even subtle disturbances lose their timing. What once arrived at predictable moments can no longer synchronize with awareness because synchronization required reaction, and reaction has ended. Fatigue no longer signals opportunity, silence no longer functions as an opening, and stillness no longer invites intrusion. What once depended on those conditions can no longer find alignment. The Psalms continue to operate beneath conscious awareness, not as phrases to be remembered or repeated, but as structure, maintaining an environment where nothing unseen organizes behavior. They do not intensify experience, they stabilize it, returning perception to a baseline where peace is assumed rather than achieved. In this baseline, responsibility does not compress inward, time does not rush forward, and rest does not require justification. Life unfolds without pressing against the inner world, because the inner world is no longer positioned where pressure can reach it. As this steadiness persists, even the memory of being followed begins to lose coherence, not because it is denied, but because it no longer connects to present reality. Connection required alignment, and alignment has been broken by steady presence. Attempts to reintroduce pressure feel incomplete, unconvincing, unable to gather momentum, because momentum depended on friction, and friction has disappeared. The system no longer provides resistance for pressure to push against, nor engagement for it to feed on. This absence of friction does not create emptiness, it creates ease, and ease allows endurance without erosion. Hours can pass without fatigue accumulating, awareness can soften without collapse, silence can deepen without uncertainty. Nothing is being held together by effort, belief, or repetition. What exists is not maintained, it is assumed. Assumption here does not mean neglect, it means inevitability. The system has settled into a condition where nothing unseen organizes behavior, nothing hidden shapes decision, and nothing subtle pressures timing. As this condition continues, there is no sense of something having been taken away, only the quiet recognition that something unnatural is no longer present. What remains feels ordinary, stable, unremarkable, and because it feels ordinary, it endures. Nothing presses inward, nothing coordinates itself in the background, nothing waits for opportunity. Opportunity has been removed because access has ended. And as moments continue to pass within this environment, the steadiness demonstrates through continuity what no declaration could ever establish, that what has ended through irrelevance does not return through force, repetition, or time. As this environment continues to hold without interruption, the recognition settles that what once felt like something you had to endure was sustained mostly by your system being trained to stay available for disruption. Availability was mistaken for resilience, readiness was mistaken for strength, and vigilance was mistaken for wisdom. But vigilance only makes sense where intrusion is possible, and intrusion is no longer possible here. When the system no longer expects to be disturbed, it stops arranging itself defensively, and when defensive arrangement ends, the space that pressure relied on quietly disappears. This is not an active removal, it is a withdrawal caused by incompatibility. What is incompatible cannot remain, no matter how long it once persisted. Psalm 91 does not promise protection that must be reactivated whenever fear arises. It reveals a dwelling that exists independently of fear, attention, or circumstance. Psalm 35 does not pursue what resists. It allows resistance to exhaust itself when it cannot provoke engagement. Psalm 17 does not sharpen perception to watch for threat. It removes the assumption that threat could approach unnoticed. Together, they do not create intensity or urgency. They create certainty, and certainty dissolves the need for constant readiness. As this certainty stabilizes, the mind releases the habit of scanning both the inner and outer world for signals that something must be addressed. Scanning was a survival behavior learned under conditions of unpredictability, and unpredictability has lost leverage. Thoughts now arise without assembling into defensive sequences, without recruiting emotion to reinforce them, without pulling attention forward or backward. They complete themselves and dissolve. Emotions surface without claiming identity, without demanding interpretation, without anchoring themselves in memory. Sensations move through the body without triggering readiness, because readiness no longer has a function. This is not numbness, and it is not detachment, it is proportion restored. Proportion allows each experience to remain within its natural limits, preventing it from expanding into threat or collapsing into avoidance. The body responds by maintaining balance rather than bracing, by staying present rather than prepared, by remaining available without exposure. Breath deepens naturally, muscles soften without weakness, posture aligns without effort, and attention widens without vulnerability. As time continues to pass in this state, even subtle habits of control begin to dissolve. Control was never about power, it was about preventing loss, and loss no longer has a framework here. Without the possibility of loss, control has nothing to protect against and quietly releases. Life unfolds without compressing inward, responsibility arises without becoming burden, and movement occurs without urgency. The Psalms continue to operate beneath conscious awareness, not as phrases that must be remembered or repeated, but as structure maintaining an inner environment where nothing unseen organizes behavior. They do not amplify sensation, they stabilize perception, returning the system to a baseline where peace is assumed rather than achieved. In this baseline, silence is not a gap waiting to be filled, fatigue is not a signal of vulnerability, and stillness is not an invitation for intrusion. What once depended on those openings can no longer find rhythm, timing, or alignment. As this condition persists, the memory of being followed, watched, or pressured begins to lose coherence, not because it is denied, but because it no longer connects to present reality. Connection required alignment, and alignment has been broken by steady presence. Attempts to reintroduce pressure feel incomplete and unconvincing, unable to gather momentum or meaning. Momentum depended on friction, and friction has disappeared. The system no longer provides resistance for pressure to push against, nor engagement for it to feed on. This absence of friction does not create emptiness, it creates ease. And ease allows endurance without erosion. Hours can pass without accumulation of fatigue, awareness can soften without collapse, and silence can deepen without uncertainty. As this condition remains stable over time, it becomes increasingly clear that what once felt like an ongoing spiritual effort was actually a response to instability that no longer exists. Effort dissolves naturally when there is nothing pressing inward, nothing demanding readiness, nothing requiring anticipation. The system no longer prepares itself for interruption because interruption has lost relevance. Psalm 91 does not train the soul to react faster. It relocates the soul to a position where reaction is unnecessary. Psalm 35 does not escalate conflict. It allows anything that depended on distortion to lose coherence when it cannot provoke engagement. Psalm 17 does not heighten alertness. It removes the assumption that something could arrive unnoticed. Together, they establish a continuity where the inner world no longer mirrors threat, where experience unfolds without compression, and where time passes without urgency. As this continuity holds, the mind releases its final attachment to prediction. Prediction once felt protective, but protection here does not come from knowing what will happen next. It comes from being positioned where what happens cannot reach inward. Thoughts arise without assembling into forecasts. Emotions surface without anchoring themselves in expectation. And sensations pass through awareness without triggering defense. This is not passivity, it is recalibration. Recalibration restores the system to a state where presence is neutral, movement is safe, and silence is complete. The body responds by remaining balanced rather than braced, grounded rather than guarded, available rather than vigilant. Breath moves freely without direction, muscles soften without loss of strength, and posture aligns without effort. As time continues in this environment, even subtle impulses to measure progress dissolve because progress implies movement toward an outcome, and there is no outcome to reach. What has been established is not advancing toward completion, it is continuing as it is. This continuation is what makes it irreversible. Nothing is being held together by repetition, memory, or intention. What exists does not depend on maintenance, it depends on position. Position does not erode. The Psalms continue to operate beneath conscious awareness, not as words to remember or repeat, but as structure maintaining an environment where nothing unseen organizes behavior. They do not intensify sensation, they normalize stability, returning perception to a baseline where peace is assumed rather than achieved. In this baseline, responsibility does not compress inward, rest does not require justification, and attention does not need to be guarded. Silence no longer functions as a gap where something might enter. Fatigue no longer signals vulnerability, and stillness no longer invites pressure. What once depended on those openings can no longer find timing or alignment. As this steadiness persists, even the concept of something quietly returning loses credibility, not because it is feared, but because the conditions it required no longer exist. Conditions do not regenerate without cooperation, and cooperation has ended. What remains is an unremarkable sense of being present without effort, of being safe without thought, of being steady without maintenance. This ordinariness is not dull, it is reliable. Reliability endures through time, through change, through silence. And as moments continue to pass within this reliability, nothing presses inward, nothing coordinates itself in the background, nothing waits for opportunity. Opportunity has been removed because access has ended. The environment holds itself unchanged by attention, emotion, or circumstance, quietly demonstrating through continuity that what has ended through irrelevance does not return through effort, repetition, or time, but remains absent simply because there is no place for it to exist. As this continuity remains undisturbed, the sense settles that what once felt like something constantly being managed has quietly resolved itself without negotiation. Management was required where instability existed, where attention needed to be directed outward or inward to prevent disruption. Here, nothing requires monitoring. Psalm 91 does not invite you to watch for danger. It establishes a dwelling where danger cannot orient itself. Psalm 35 does not argue with what resists. It allows resistance to collapse when it cannot draw response. Psalm 17 does not sharpen awareness to detect intrusion. It removes the premise that intrusion could approach unnoticed. Together, they form a condition where the inner world is no longer arranged around defense, where experience unfolds without compression, and where time moves without pressure. As this condition holds, the mind releases its habit of returning to old reference points because reference points were only necessary when stability was uncertain. Thought now moves freely without looping, without rehearsing outcomes, without revisiting past tension. Emotions surface and pass without anchoring identity, without demanding explanation, without leaving residue. Sensations move through the body without triggering readiness or alarm, because alarm no longer has a function here. This is not withdrawal from life, it is engagement without threat. Engagement that does not require armor, strategy, or anticipation. The body responds by maintaining equilibrium rather than bracing, presence rather than preparation, groundedness rather than guarding. Breath flows naturally, muscles release excess tension without losing strength, and posture aligns without effort. As minutes and hours continue in this state, even subtle impulses to reassert control dissolve, because control belonged to environments where loss was possible. Loss no longer has context here. Without the framework of loss, urgency loses meaning, and with urgency gone, pressure has no leverage. The Psalms continue to operate beneath conscious awareness, not as phrases to recall, but as structure sustaining an environment where nothing unseen organizes behavior. They do not heighten experience, they stabilize it, returning perception to a baseline where peace is not a goal but a given. In this baseline, silence feels complete rather than empty, rest feels natural rather than earned, and awareness feels open without vulnerability. Nothing presses inward, nothing arranges itself in the background, nothing waits for opportunity. Opportunity requires access, and access has been removed. As this steadiness persists, the idea of something quietly attempting to return becomes implausible, not because it is feared, but because the pathway it once used no longer exists. Pathways dissolve when they are no longer walked, and they do not reappear without repeated use. What remains is a simple, reliable sense of being where you are without needing to maintain it, explain it, or defend it. This reliability does not announce itself. It demonstrates itself by continuing unchanged as time passes, unaffected by attention, emotion, or circumstance. And as this continuation unfolds, it confirms without declaration that what has ended through irrelevance does not return because there is no longer any place for it to belong. As this state continues to hold with quiet consistency, the understanding deepens that what once felt like endurance was actually adaptation to an environment that no longer exists. Adaptation kept the system flexible under pressure, but pressure is no longer present and flexibility is no longer being tested. What remains is stability without strain. Psalm 91 does not describe safety as something fragile that must be preserved. It reveals safety as a condition that exists independent of awareness or effort. Psalm 35 does not resolve tension through escalation. It allows tension to dissolve when it cannot provoke alignment. Psalm 17 does not heighten perception to guard against threat. It removes the assumption that threat could arrive close enough to matter. Together, they establish a state where the inner world no longer mirrors external unpredictability, where experience unfolds without compression, and where silence does not signal risk. As this continuity persists, the mind releases its final attachment to rehearsal, because rehearsal was a response to instability, and instability has lost relevance. Thoughts now arise and pass without assembling into defensive narratives, without pulling attention forward into anticipation or backward into memory. Emotions surface and dissolve without anchoring identity, without demanding explanation, without lingering. Sensations move through the body without triggering readiness because readiness no longer has a function. This is not disengagement, it is recalibration completed. The system has returned to a state where presence is neutral, movement is safe, and rest is uninterrupted. The body responds by remaining balanced rather than braced, grounded rather than guarded, available rather than vigilant. Breath deepens naturally without instruction, muscles soften without weakness, posture aligns without effort, and attention widens without vulnerability. As time continues in this environment, even the concept of maintenance dissolves because maintenance implies the possibility of collapse, and collapse no longer has a framework. What exists is not being held together by intention, belief, or repetition. It is simply present. The Psalms continue to operate beneath conscious awareness, not as phrases to repeat or remember, but as structure sustaining an environment where nothing unseen organizes behavior. They do not intensify sensation, they normalize stability, returning perception to a baseline where peace is assumed rather than achieved. In this baseline, responsibility does not carry threat, time does not rush, and silence feels complete. Fatigue no longer signals vulnerability, stillness no longer invites intrusion, and absence no longer creates anxiety. What once depended on those conditions can no longer find rhythm or alignment. As this steadiness persists, even the memory of being pressured, watched, or followed loses coherence, not because it is denied, but because it no longer connects to present reality. Connection required alignment, and alignment has been broken by steady presence. Attempts to reintroduce pressure feel incomplete and unconvincing, unable to gather momentum or meaning. Momentum depended on friction, and friction has disappeared. The system no longer provides resistance for pressure to push against, nor engagement for it to feed on. This absence of friction does not create emptiness, it creates ease, and ease allows endurance without erosion. Hours can pass without accumulation of tension, awareness can soften without collapse, and silence can deepen without uncertainty. Nothing presses inward, nothing coordinates itself in the background, nothing waits for opportunity. Opportunity has been removed because access has ended. And as this environment continues unchanged, it demonstrates through continuity what no declaration could ever establish, that what has ended through irrelevance does not return, not through effort, not through repetition, not through time, but remains absent simply because there is no longer any place for it to exist. As this calm permanence continues to settle, the sense grows that what once demanded attention has quietly released its claim. Attention was the last doorway, not because it empowered anything, but because it allowed continuity through awareness. When awareness no longer orients itself around disturbance, disturbance loses coherence. Psalm 91 does not invite vigilance, it establishes belonging, a place where the soul does not have to check whether it is safe, because safety is the condition of being there. Psalm 35 does not energize resistance. It allows resistance to fade when it cannot gather relevance. Psalm 17 does not intensify watchfulness. It removes the idea that something could arrive unnoticed. Together, they shape a reality where the inner world no longer organizes itself around possibility of threat, and where experience unfolds without compressing inward. As this reality holds, the mind releases its final reflex to interpret stillness as vulnerability. Stillness becomes supportive rather than uncertain, silence becomes complete rather than anticipatory, and rest becomes uninterrupted rather than provisional. Thoughts arise and pass without assembling into strategies, without looping into rehearsal, without attaching themselves to identity. Emotions surface and dissolve without demanding explanation, without carrying residue, without organizing behavior. Sensations move through the body without triggering readiness, because readiness no longer has a function. This is not disengagement from life, it is life experienced without pressure. The body responds by maintaining balance rather than bracing, presence rather than preparation, groundedness rather than guarding. Breath deepens naturally without instruction, muscles soften without weakness, posture aligns without effort, and attention widens without exposure. As time continues in this environment, even subtle impulses to measure safety dissolve, because measurement implied uncertainty, and uncertainty no longer has relevance. The Psalms continue to operate beneath conscious awareness, not as words to remember or repeat, but as structure maintaining an environment where nothing unseen organizes behavior. They do not intensify experience, they stabilize it, returning perception to a baseline where peace is assumed rather than achieved. In this baseline, responsibility does not compress inward, time does not rush forward, and awareness does not need to be guarded. Fatigue no longer signals vulnerability, silence no longer invites intrusion, and stillness no longer suggests risk. What once depended on those signals can no longer find timing or alignment. As this steadiness persists, the memory of being pressured or followed loses coherence, not because it is denied, but because it no longer connects to present reality. Connection required alignment, and alignment has been broken by steady presence. Attempts to reintroduce pressure feel incomplete and unconvincing, unable to gather momentum or meaning. Momentum depended on friction, and friction has disappeared. The system no longer provides resistance for pressure to push against, nor engagement for it to feed on. This absence of friction does not create emptiness, it creates ease, and ease allows endurance without erosion. Hours can pass without accumulation of tension, awareness can soften without collapse, and silence can deepen without uncertainty. Nothing presses inward, nothing coordinates itself in the background, nothing waits for opportunity. Opportunity has been removed because access has ended, and as this environment continues unchanged, it demonstrates through quiet continuity what no declaration could ever establish, that what has ended through irrelevance does not return, not through effort, not through repetition, not through time, but remains absent simply because there is no longer any place for it to exist. As this settled environment continues to hold, the awareness matures that what once felt like something needing protection was actually a system accustomed to negotiating with instability. Negotiation has ended. When there is nothing to negotiate with, posture relaxes without collapse and attention rests without drifting. Psalm 91 does not describe protection as a response to danger. It reveals protection as the condition that exists when danger has no point of reference. Psalm 35 does not confront opposition with force. It allows opposition to dissolve when it cannot find relevance or response. Psalm 17 does not sharpen perception to detect threat. It removes the premise that threat could draw near without being neutralized by position alone. Together, they establish a reality where the inner world no longer contracts around uncertainty and where silence no longer carries questions. As this reality persists, the mind releases the final habit of checking whether peace remains intact, because checking assumes fragility, and fragility no longer applies. Peace here is not delicate, it is structural. Thoughts arise without pulling awareness into evaluation, emotions surface without asking to be resolved, and sensations pass through the body without recruiting readiness. This is not detachment, it is presence without pressure, presence that does not need reinforcement, presence that does not fade when attention softens. The body responds by maintaining equilibrium rather than bracing, groundedness rather than guarding, availability rather than vigilance. Breath flows naturally without instruction, muscles release excess tension without losing integrity, posture aligns without effort, and awareness widens without exposure. As time continues in this state, even subtle habits of anticipation dissolve, because anticipation belonged to environments where interruption was possible. Interruption no longer has context here. Silence does not open a door, fatigue does not lower a barrier, stillness does not invite intrusion. What once depended on those openings can no longer align itself with experience. The Psalms continue to operate beneath conscious awareness, not as repeated phrases, but as structure, sustaining an environment where nothing unseen organizes behavior. They do not intensify sensation, they normalize stability, returning perception to a baseline where peace is assumed rather than pursued. In this baseline, time does not rush, responsibility does not compress inward, and rest does not require permission. Nothing presses inward, nothing arranges itself in the background, nothing waits for opportunity. Opportunity has been removed because access has ended. As this steadiness persists, the idea of something returning quietly loses all credibility, not because it is resisted, but because the pathways it once relied on no longer exist. Pathways dissolve when they are no longer walked, and they do not reappear without repetition. What remains is a simple, reliable sense of being present without effort, of being steady without maintenance, of being safe without thought. This reliability does not announce itself, it demonstrates itself by continuing unchanged as time passes, unaffected by attention, emotion, or circumstance. And as this continuation unfolds, it confirms without declaration that what has ended through irrelevance does not return, because there is no longer any place for it to belong. As this uninterrupted stability continues to deepen, the understanding settles that what once felt like something you needed to survive was actually a condition you were never meant to live inside. Survival mode shaped perception, narrowed awareness, and trained the system to expect pressure as a constant companion. But expectation has now been released, and with it the entire structure that depended on anticipation quietly dissolves. Psalm 91 does not describe refuge as a temporary hiding place. It reveals a dwelling where the soul is not visiting safety, but living within it. Psalm 35 does not rush to expose what is hidden. It allows what is hidden to lose coherence when truth no longer competes for space. Psalm 17 does not heighten alertness to guard against unseen threat. It removes the premise that threat could approach close enough to require defense. Together, they establish a state where the inner world no longer prepares itself for disturbance, where awareness rests without scanning, and where silence no longer signals danger. As this state holds, the mind releases the last remnants of urgency, because urgency only existed where time felt dangerous. Time is no longer dangerous here. Moments pass without needing to be managed. Hours unfold without accumulating pressure, and stillness no longer needs to be filled. Thoughts arise without pulling attention into rehearsal. Emotions surface without anchoring identity, and sensations move through the body without triggering readiness. This is not disengagement, it is alignment restored. Alignment does not require effort, it requires absence of interference. The body responds by maintaining balance rather than bracing, groundedness rather than guarding, availability rather than vigilance. Breath deepens naturally without instruction. Muscles soften without weakness, posture aligns without effort, and attention widens without vulnerability. As time continues in this environment, even subtle habits of control dissolve, because control belonged to environments where loss was possible. Loss no longer has context here. Without the framework of loss, fear loses narrative, anxiety loses direction, and pressure loses leverage. The Psalms continue to operate beneath conscious awareness, not as words that must be remembered or repeated, but as structure sustaining an environment where nothing unseen organizes behavior. They do not intensify experience, they normalize peace, returning perception to a baseline where rest is natural and vigilance is unnecessary. In this baseline, silence feels complete rather than empty, fatigue feels neutral rather than exposing, and stillness feels supportive rather than uncertain. Nothing presses inward, nothing arranges itself in the background, nothing waits for opportunity. Opportunity has been removed because access has ended. As this steadiness persists, the memory of being followed, watched, or subtly pressured loses coherence, not because it is denied, but because it no longer connects to present reality. Connection required alignment, and alignment has been broken by steady presence. Attempts to reintroduce pressure feel incomplete and unconvincing, unable to gather momentum or meaning. Momentum depended on friction, and friction has disappeared. The system no longer provides resistance for pressure to push against, nor engagement for it to feed on. This absence of friction does not create emptiness, it creates ease, and ease allows endurance without erosion. Hours can pass without accumulation of tension, awareness can soften without collapse, and silence can deepen without uncertainty. Nothing presses inward, nothing coordinates itself in the background, nothing waits for opportunity. And as this environment continues unchanged, it demonstrates through quiet continuity what no declaration could ever establish, that what has ended through irrelevance does not return, not through effort, not through repetition, not through time, but remains absent simply because there is no longer any place for it to exist. As this settled state continues to remain intact, there is a growing sense that what once felt like constant adjustment was never a requirement of life itself, but a response to an environment that demanded readiness. Readiness shaped posture, posture shaped perception, and perception shaped reality. Now that readiness has dissolved, reality reorganizes itself quietly around stability rather than threat. Psalm 91 does not describe safety as something fragile that must be protected from interruption. It reveals safety as the condition that exists when interruption no longer has a pathway. Psalm 35 does not escalate conflict to expose what is hidden. It allows what is hidden to lose structure when truth is no longer pressured to compete. Psalm 17 does not heighten awareness to guard against unseen movement. It removes the assumption that unseen movement could approach close enough to matter. Together, they establish a continuity where the inner world no longer tightens around possibility, where experience unfolds without compression, and where silence does not need to be monitored. As this continuity holds, the mind releases its last tendency to measure stability because measurement implies the possibility of loss, and loss no longer applies. Thoughts arise without assembling into defensive frameworks, emotions surface without demanding meaning, sensations pass through the body without recruiting readiness. This is not detachment from experience, it is experience freed from pressure. Freed experience does not rush, does not brace, does not prepare for collapse. The body responds by remaining balanced rather than braced, grounded rather than guarded, present rather than prepared. Breath flows naturally without instruction, muscles release excess tension without weakness, posture aligns without effort, and awareness widens without vulnerability. As time continues within this environment, even subtle impulses to interpret silence as absence dissolve, because absence implied lack, and lack no longer has relevance. Nothing is missing here. Nothing is being waited for. Nothing needs to arrive. The Psalms continue to operate beneath conscious awareness, not as phrases to remember or repeat, but as structure sustaining an environment where nothing unseen organizes behavior. They do not intensify sensation, they normalize stability, returning perception to a baseline where peace is assumed rather than achieved. In this baseline, responsibility does not compress inward, time does not accelerate, and rest does not require permission. Fatigue no longer signals vulnerability, stillness no longer invites intrusion, and silence no longer suggests danger. What once depended on those signals can no longer find alignment. As this steadiness persists, the memory of being pressured, watched, or subtly followed loses coherence, not because it is denied, but because it no longer connects to present reality. Connection required alignment, and alignment has been broken by steady presence. Attempts to reintroduce pressure feel incomplete and unconvincing, unable to gather momentum or meaning. Momentum depended on friction, and friction has disappeared. The system no longer provides resistance for pressure to push against, nor engagement for it to feed on. This absence of friction does not create emptiness, it creates ease, and ease allows endurance without erosion. Hours can pass without accumulation of tension, awareness can soften without collapse, and silence can deepen without uncertainty. Nothing presses inward, nothing coordinates itself in the background, nothing waits for opportunity. Opportunity has been removed because access has ended. And as this environment continues unchanged, it demonstrates through quiet continuity what no declaration could ever establish, that what has ended through irrelevance does not return, not through effort, not through repetition, not through time, but remains absent simply because there is no longer any place for it to exist. As this stable environment continues to assert itself quietly, there is a deeper recognition that what once felt like protection being actively maintained has now become protection being passively assumed. Nothing needs to be checked, reinforced, or reaffirmed because the state no longer depends on awareness to exist. Awareness now rests inside it rather than holding it in place. Psalm 91 does not describe a shelter that must be returned to repeatedly. It reveals a dwelling that remains whether attention is sharp or drifting. Psalm 35 does not resolve tension by exposing what is hidden. It allows what is hidden to lose relevance when it can no longer draw reaction. Psalm 17 does not train perception to detect danger early. It removes the premise that danger could approach close enough to matter. Together, they establish a continuity where the inner world no longer organizes itself around potential disruption and where experience unfolds without inward compression. As this continuity holds, the mind releases its final habit of bracing against possibility because possibility implied instability, and instability no longer applies. Thoughts arise without forming defenses, emotions surface without claiming territory, sensations pass through the body without triggering readiness. This is not detachment from life. It is life experienced without pressure. The body responds by maintaining balance rather than bracing, groundedness rather than guarding, presence rather than preparation. Breath flows naturally without instruction, muscles soften without weakness, posture aligns without effort, and attention widens without vulnerability. As time continues in this environment, even subtle impulses to verify safety dissolve, because verification assumes fragility, and fragility is no longer part of this condition. The Psalms continue to operate beneath conscious awareness, not as phrases to repeat, but as structure sustaining an environment where nothing unseen organizes behavior. They do not intensify experience, they normalize stability, returning perception to a baseline where peace is assumed rather than achieved. In this baseline, responsibility does not compress inward, silence does not invite intrusion, and rest does not require permission. Fatigue no longer signals exposure, stillness no longer suggests risk, and quiet no longer carries suspense. What once depended on those signals can no longer find alignment. As this steadiness persists, the idea of something quietly returning loses all coherence, not because it is resisted, but because the pathways it once relied on no longer exist. Pathways dissolve when they are no longer walked, and they do not reappear without repetition. What remains is a simple, reliable sense of being present without effort, of being steady without maintenance, of being safe without thought. This reliability does not announce itself. It demonstrates itself by continuing unchanged as time passes, unaffected by attention, emotion, or circumstance. And as this continuation unfolds, it confirms without declaration that what has ended through irrelevance does not return, because there is no longer any place for it to belong. As this state gently completes its work, there is no sense of ending, only the quiet awareness that something has been settled. Nothing needs to be concluded with force, nothing needs to be affirmed again, nothing needs to be held in place. What has changed did not change through effort, so it does not require maintenance. It remains because it is now the natural condition. The protection you are inhabiting does not switch off when words end, and the peace that has formed does not depend on sound to continue. Psalm 91 does not close a moment, it establishes a dwelling. Psalm 35 does not end a struggle, it removes the need for one. Psalm 17 does not mark completion, it seals awareness so that nothing needs to be watched or anticipated. As this sealing holds, there is no instruction to leave this place because this place is not temporary. It is where rest happens naturally, where sleep deepens without disturbance, where the night passes without unseen pressure organizing itself in the background. You do not need to remember what was said here, and you do not need to replay anything for it to remain effective. What mattered was not attention, but presence, and presence does not end when sound fades. As you continue into the next moments of your night, whether you remain awake or fall asleep, this environment continues unchanged. Nothing follows, nothing returns, nothing reorganizes itself when vigilance softens. The same covering that holds now holds later, the same stillness that surrounds now surrounds after, and the same quiet authority remains without needing to be activated again. If this place has felt right to you, if you sense that this is where your spirit rests without effort, you can return to this refuge whenever you need, through these psalms and through others like them, not as rituals to repeat, but as places to inhabit. And if you choose to remain here longer, allowing this state to deepen through other moments on this channel, you are simply staying where nothing unseen can reach you. There is nothing more to do, nothing more to wait for, and nothing more to guard against. What needed to end has ended, and what remains continues quietly, steadily, and securely beyond this moment.